Okay, so how was how was it like being Hispanic and being in public school at the time you were like in grade school?
To be honest with you, I never gave it a second thought. That's how our schools were made up. I never thought of it being, oh, I'm Hispanic, they're white.
Do you think like when Grandpa went to school it was a little different for him?
Well, your grandpa only went to the third grade,
Uh-huh.
and I never did talk to him about his schooling.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to guess, I'm pretty sure it was like with me. It's just mainly Hispanic.
Did Grandma ever say anything about her experience in public school?
The only thing that I remember about your grandma going to school is that she went to school in Mexico,
Okay.
and she earned a scholarship to go to college, which she decided she didn't want to go.
And was that like family reasons, personal reasons?
She met your grandpa.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Okay, so...
At least that's the story I've been told.
Okay. So you weren't born in the 60s. When were you born?
I was born 1961, thank you very much.
So you kind of lived through the 60s, right?
I really don't remember much of the 60s. Although, when I started substitute teaching in Brownsville, when I was going to college, one of the teachers at one of the schools I substitute taught at reminded me how I knew everything about the rocket going to about the 1969 astronauts going to the moon, and how I knew every little detail about the rocket.
Okay. So, like, you lived through the 80s, right?
Yes.
How was that like? Wait, what were the 80s like? The peace, right? Like groovy and stuff.
70s were more of that.
What were the 80s? Black Panther? No, not Black Panther.
Just freedom, I guess. I don't know. I don't know that the 80s had a name to it, but for me they were awesome because I had just finished high school.
Okay.
And I was going to college.
Okay.
I was single.
Dad, you don't need to say this in video.
No, the reason I bring it up is because it was my time. I didn't have any commitments other than going to school. And I was lucky enough to be able to play baseball. So those were the best years of my life, obviously, honestly.
Do you know, like, any, like, your ancestors, like, obviously not you, but, like, your ancestors, maybe Grandma, since she was from Mexico, like, her journey, like, was she an immigrant?
Yeah, I guess you could say that,
like,
because she grew up in a little town near Monterrey.
Okay.
But I guess after a while, her family moved to Matamoros.
Okay.
Okay? And, in fact, that's where she met your grandpa. Was at kind of like the town square.
Okay.
Because on weekends, that's where everybody would hang out. Your grandpa grew up in a little town called San Pedro, which is just on this side of the river, literally.
Okay.
And so, while we weren't immigrants, we kind of grew up in that kind of culture. And one thing I do remember growing up is that my grandma on your grandpa's side would take all my brothers and sister to go out to pick okra or cotton out in the fields. I remember the big truck that would come by the neighborhood to pick everybody up early in the morning, and then they wouldn't come back till late at night. So I'm the only one of our family, as far as my brothers and sister, that didn't get to do stuff like that.
And, like, why was that? Like,
because I guess I was too young.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember how old you were, like, during this time?
If I had to guess, maybe about anywhere from 7 to 10 years old. Maybe older. No, probably about that time.
Uh-huh.
Because your Uncle Junior, my youngest brother, he graduated from high school in 1974. So I'm assuming in probably the late 60s is when that kind of stuff happened.
Okay. You know how you said, like, Grandpa stopped at 3rd grade
Mm-hmm.
because he wanted to take care of his family?
Well, your great-grandpa
Okay.
father was killed, and believe it or not, at a poker game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like, was it that intense, like, back then?
This is a story that I heard growing up. Your great-grandpa would hang out with his friends,
And this is Grandpa's dad?
correct.
Okay.
One night they were playing cards. I don't know if it was at somebody's house or at a club or a bar, whatever. And there was this certain person that wanted to join in the game.
Okay.
But your great-grandpa made fun of him and said, "You're too small, little kid. Go away."
Okay.
And so the story goes that whoever that was came back with a barber's razor blade and just
Oh, okay.
cut open his stomach from one side to the other.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I remember hearing that my dad, later on in life,
Okay.
saw him to where the man was already old or whatever, and he told your grandpa, "I'm not sorry about what happened, but if you want to take revenge out, you can." And
So he never, like, the guy that killed my great-grandfather, like, never got arrested or anything?
I don't know about that. I'll be honest
So-
with you.
Grandpa saw that guy, like...
Older, in the later years,
Okay.
when
and-
they were both adults, and the person that did that to your great-grandpa told your grandpa, "I understand you probably have a lot of hate towards me and all this, and I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to take out your revenge on me."
Mhm.
And according to the stories that were handed down, your grandpa just walked away.
Okay. And so, like, when that happened, he kind of had to take the role of being the man of the house?
Yeah, because at that time, my dad's family,
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of brothers and sisters, so he was one of the oldest ones. So he had to do anything to help support everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things he did, shine shoes. In fact, he was a boxer.
Grandpa.
Yes.
I know he did bowling, but I never...
No, this was way before.
Okay. Before
Yeah.
he met Grandma? Obviously,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
And so he obviously did a lot of odd jobs
Mm-hmm.
to help support everybody else. And I don't think it was only him. I bet there were some other uncles and aunts that did similar things. But that's the story I've heard, was that he stopped going to school after 3rd grade to help support everybody.
Mm-hmm. And, like, did Grandpa obviously have, like, sisters and brothers, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, are there still some alive today?
I'll be honest with you, I don't think so.
No?
No.
Did you ever, like, talk to them?
Oh,
Or, like,
yeah,
did they ever,
yeah.
share their side of the story of, like, what happens and, like,
Well,
how-
I don't know that. No, we really didn't talk
Talk
about
about
stuff
that.
like that. But as
Mhm.
far as hanging out with them, yeah, I mean, it was interesting because I remember growing up, the house we lived at, the next street over, my grandma lived there, and then down the street, well, 2 houses down, one of my uncles lived there, and then at the corner of that street lived another uncle of mine. So it was
Okay.
kind of like close together.
Okay. And then, obviously, like, with Grandpa going into, like, World War II, and
Mhm.
were you old enough to understand, like, why he wanted to go into the Army?
Not really. Not really.
Mm-hmm.
And I never did ask him. I'm assuming like these days people do things like that to improve their lives.
Okay.
Yeah. But as far as asking him why he served, no, I never asked him directly.
And did he ever like talk about his experience during the war?
Very rarely. I do remember that he would not like what are called used to be called TV dinners, which are today microwavable meals.
Okay.
He never liked to eat those because those meals reminded him of what they used to eat out in the field during the war.
Okay.
Once again, I'll never forget we were watching because your grandpa was in D-Day.
Okay.
He was in the third or fourth wave of soldiers that landed on the beach. But I think it was, I remember sitting down with him and watching the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, which is a story about soldiers that went to Europe to bring back the only son of a family that was left. And I'll never forget, at the beginning of the movie, they show scenes of soldiers landing on the beach and just the incredible violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember your grandpa telling me, you know what, turn it off. Because obviously that brought back memories.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how true this is, but I think once or twice your grandpa told me that he used to be a sniper, where they would have him on a tree
Mm-hmm.
and wait for German soldiers to come up the road so he could shoot them down.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you like to share?
No.
That's it?
No more questions.
You're free to say whatever you want.
I wish there was more that I could pass on to you. And maybe it'll happen.
Maybe what will
I
happen?
get more stories as we get older. I mean, there's more. Obviously, there's more to tell you about your grandma and grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
But you wouldn't have enough time in the class to go over those experiences.
Well, Coach Moore said, not one time a kid was like, oh, I have 40 minutes. Is that too long? And he was like, oh, no, that's...
I know that after the war, your grandpa came back to Brownsville, and they settled in a house, 3 houses down from your grandma.
Okay.
And I remember hearing how your grandpa left to Chicago on his own.
Okay.
To find a job or to find something better, and how your grandma stayed behind with your uncles and aunt for 8 years while your grandpa was up working in Chicago, and your grandpa would only come down for holidays or vacation time. I remember him starting to work at a bowling alley.
Okay.
Where they would, one of his jobs was what is called a pin setter, which literally he would be at the back of the lane and set the pins down on the lane. And he would live there in the back.
Oh, okay.
He had a cot. And he stayed with this family that helped them get a job with the U.S. Postal Service. And he started working at that up there. And that's when your grandma and everybody moved up to Chicago. And while they were up there, I was born. And I remember hearing that your grandpa wanted to come back because your great-grandma was getting old and he wanted to be here to be able to help her out. And it turns out that your great-grandma basically outlived all your aunts and uncles.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And there's just a lot. I mean...
And, you were, obviously born in Chicago. How long did you stay up there?
5 years.
And like when you came back down, like being that young, did you still like recognize like there's a huge change and stuff?
No, not really. Not really.
What else I was gonna ask you something that you just said right now. Shoot, I forgot. Wonderful. What did you just say? That you moved back down.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then I remember you told me that like once Grandma had passed, you wanted to move down to be closer. Now, did you get like an idea, or like I'm pretty sure there's a better word because of what Grandpa did when he moved back down?
I really didn't think of it as being connected like that.
Okay.
I just wanted to be closer to your grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting is that when we moved down here, I remember we would go visit him.
Mm-hmm.
But he once told me that he would see me more when we still lived in San Marcos
mm-hmm.
than when we moved down here to Laguna Vista.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But, yeah. Anything else?
Do you want to add anything else? Anything?
I think this is a real neat project because, in a way, you're getting to see or have an idea about your family history
mm-hmm.
and what your ancestors did
mm-hmm.
and where they came from. And hopefully you'll realize that every story is unique.
Yeah.
But I really think this is a cool project.
With you being the youngest of your siblings, did you ever hear about stories of like maybe if your siblings had hard times being in public school and being Hispanic, or?
Not really.
No?
If I had to guess, this is my opinion, of course. Back then, when we went to school, there wasn't such divisiveness between Hispanics this,
mm-hmm.
white people that. We all got along.
Yeah.
Maybe because things were simpler.
Yeah.
But as far as
And like now, like, do you like with my like school life and stuff, and like how it's like grade school is kind of coming to an end? Well, it is basically coming to an end. Did you ever see like differences from when you went to school, and then from when I like was going to school?
Well, obviously, the technology is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's taken over. I remember going to college and still using a typewriter.
Oh, okay.
And so I remember having a graduate class in which I had to turn in a research paper, and I originally turned it in having done it on a typewriter, and my professor didn't even look at it. All she said, "This needs to be done on a computer." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Yeah, my graduate students must turn in work done on a computer, not on a typewriter." And my response to her was, "Well, I don't own a computer, and I work best at home."
Uh-huh.
And she says, "That's not a good excuse."
Mm-hmm.
She says, "You need to come to the computer labs on campus and learn how to use a computer." And it was not a shock, but it was interesting in that here I am. I already had a job and a family. I was already in my early 30s.
Wait, so you're still going to college while I was born?
No.
So then what family?
What do you mean? Well, with Jessica and Victoria.
Oh, okay.
And I remember it felt kind of weird because I would go to the computer labs to do my papers, not knowing how to use a computer, and being taught by a 19 or 20-year-old
mm-hmm.
on how to, for example, how do you center words and how do you set up a title page and things like that.
And how old were you, like, at the time when you had to ask, like, those?
I was at least 30, anywhere between 31 and 35.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was interesting.
Yeah.
So the being in this field for almost 30 years, I've seen a lot of changes,
Yeah.
a lot of different things.
From when you went to school.
Obviously, yeah. And even when I just started working
Oh, really?
as a teacher, within these 30 years, there have been tremendous changes in the learning environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting.
That's nice.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're going to end it there.
All righty.